Boom. All right, everyone. We're back for Act 3 of Season 2 of Arcane. I think they did as well as they could with the way they set it up. I was thinking about the connective tissue motif of the entire show. And I think the main theme for every character is transformation, at least the core characters who we would call the good guys. Every character goes through a transformation where they become a negative version of themselves. And negative doesn't mean negative in a bad way. It's just different, opposite of who they were prior to said change. And obviously the easiest ones to pick at this are characters like Vander, who literally becomes a werewolf beast man thing, and then Victor, who becomes a god thing, celestial being, potentially. We'll get there. We'll unpack that one, because I feel like we're going to spend majority of our time there. But I think to start there is a good springboard to encapsulate the rest of this conversation.
So what's to start with the ideas of transformation?
Yeah, like the metamorphosis, transformation, because I think every character kind of does that this season.
Yeah. I agree. But every character does that. In fact, there's symbols of transformation throughout the whole thing.
Absolutely.
Like, you could think of the Arcane as a thing which transforms other things, catalyst for transformation. Yeah. And so if transformation is the theme, then yeah, I mean, that definitely also is just a sign of good writing that you have a character arc at all, as opposed to kind of cookie cutter characters that remain the same just in different circumstances and never adapt or learn anything. So that transformation is both a theme and a sign of good writing.
And I think to kind of keep building on that, because we had a bunch of predictions about where things were going to go, because of how climactic the end sequence with Isha sacrificing herself, and we thought it would pick up loosely right where it had left off. Jinx is in jail, and she's like depressed, like she's given up. You know, the first time I think we see her without braids, and she's just kind of like laying in a pool of her hair. Vi is kind of recovering from her injuries. Jayce is kind of the leader of the council again. And it's just, and then the power struggle has really fully formed itself where now it's kind of Singed and Mbessa versus everyone else. And then whatever Victor plays in this role. Because we see that the doctor is hooking up the body of Warwick or Vander to this like chrysalis that has like formed around Victor's body. And then he very quickly is still alive, like talking through the corpses of his followers or whatever. Like it's just kind of creepy more than anything else. And everyone's just kind of cool with it, which I'm like, I'm a little surprised at how people are just like, whatever, dude, like it's fine.
They're just like, it's magic, everything's crazy.
It's just, everyone just like, whatever, dude. I guess if it means, means to an end, fuck it. Like I don't need to understand it if I can use it. And it's kind of at this point too, we'll circle back to the girls and the Vi Jinx part of this, but I feel like it's at this point too that Victor's character escalates. I think like he felt like he was going one direction.
You want to begin? I want to begin with Vander. I think we should get other things out of the way.
I feel like too, because yeah, I mean, most of this is going to be talking about the Jayce Victor arc completing it.
Let me pick up on Jinx.
I think that's a good point, and we can interweave those bits into the more cosmic parts of this.
So I last time critiqued the show because I didn't buy that Jinx was a symbol. Yes. And I didn't think she did anything that particularly earned it. And I thought that maybe that the way that they could go about this was that her connection with this child, that's like a symbol of her own childhoodness, the surviving powder here. And the death of that child would be the launching pad for her to go full Jinx in some sense. I'm happy to say it was wrong and that they did something that I didn't expect, and I liked it a lot. I think the fact that she was depressed at the end point, total despair, done, was worked.
I think
fit. I believed every bit of it. I'm
Right.
happy to say that he actually took the more moral choice.
I actually really like the sequence too, like where she's conversing with herself, right? But it's Silco, like this vision of Silco that she's having monologue at her about identities and things like that, and like choices we make, right? Whatever we represent to ourselves and to the world. And he's like, well, you can continue to let those things box you in, or you can break the cycle. And I think what's cool about that actual sequence too is the color motifs they chose, is because Silco has that glass eye or whatever it is from season 1, and throughout the season it's all red, but in that moment it's blue, which I think is telling. Maybe it's just a motif for Jinx because her whole color palette is just blue in general.
Or balance.
Right. And I think for Jinx too, that makes sense now that we've seen it all, is that the reason I think she falls into despair, at least at that level, is that she finally lost another part of herself, right? Like you could think of Isha as another family member. And I watched actually a video earlier today, and they called Isha Powder if everything went right. Because if you look at her arc, is she can tinker with like the bombs and things like that, and it goes right. You know, she does the power, like the paint bombs, and it does good things. She's able to put things back together. And then at the very end, because she sees Jinx or Powder as a hero, it inspires her to be a hero. And instead of standing on the sidelines and being scared and, putting the monkey bomb in it, it goes into the room and accidentally kills her friends, she's able to be the one to overcharge the gun, go right into the heart of the danger and sacrifice herself to save everyone else. And it's I think it's this double whammy of like, maybe Jinx realizing that she isn't the hero, or she wishes she could have done those things but didn't make those choices, but yet she can inspire someone to be that way. But she also throws it away because she doesn't believe it.
She definitely does. She's a hero.
No,
I mean, she up entirely in the point of suicide. It seems to me that the death of that child was the end for her, so to speak. She was finished. That every choice she had made, that she had seen herself make, was a bad decision.
Yeah.
So tell her that she can break the cycle, that she can get out of the box that she's put herself in, that she's been trapped in a kind of habit, right? That you could imagine that that's what an identity is. It's a habit of behavior. And that you can break the habit, but the only way she knows how to get out of that is to, in some sense, do what she always does, which is break things, and so break herself. Right? Mm-hmm. So she commits to dying, only to be pulled out of it by Echo later, which we can get to in a moment. But I liked what they did with Jinx. I liked that was the place they brought her. Like, what I wouldn't have bought was her like rising to the occasion and becoming some like all's good that ends well kind of a thing. It's like Jinx, you can't
like
give up
too optimistic.
Jinx did make many mistakes.
Right.
Jinx was a bad person. If she's a murderer, that's bad. And so for her to just get off the hook, that would have driven me nuts. But they didn't let her off the hook, and they kind of showed what a lifestyle like that, a chaotic life, leads to in a believable way. And I like that. So anyway, that's my thoughts on that part of the Jinx arc. I like that.
Yeah.
We can get to the end when we reach the climax here, but
I think from this point forward, because we kind of jumped, we just skipped all of episode 7. Yeah. We skipped all of 7 because it was totally like different, total like tangent of the story almost.
Yeah. Because episode 7 is going to lead us right into Victor.
Exactly.
Because we could talk about Echo first. Echo and Heimerdinger.
Right. And I think this is kind of more of what we were alluding to with like, they're setting up bigger things in the world, bigger playground, bigger stakes at play. Because the question that we've been having this whole time, Jayce came from somewhere, or at least experienced something, and it messed him up. And it left this open arc of like, well, what the hell happened to Heimerdinger and Echo? at that same time. And so this is finally, closes out those question marks, at least to the most that we can, because there still are questions after this Echo storyline. But it's interesting, right? Because now we have Echo wakes up in like an alternate version of himself. And it's not abundantly clear exactly what are the differences in this world, except that the Zon underworld part of this is totally different. Echo seems to be kind of this boy genius down there creating things, and Powder is Powder. She didn't become Jinx, and everything seems somewhat harmonious, I guess is probably the best way to put it. And then we realize that at some point, which looks like the inciting incident from season 1, where they're at that workshop and steal the little hex marbles, the explosion went off and Vi died in that explosion. And then we basically, from there, Echo goes on a mission to basically recreate the hex core in that world, because it hadn't happened, to get back to, is it timeline? What would you call it? Is it more of a parallel reality? Probably parallel reality.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it is parallel reality.
And so he doesn't belong. Yeah.
Now I'm going to get into the psychoanalysis. Last time I talked about a hex core or the arcane as being the prima materia, and the prima materia is unordered, and that it's something that you can come into contact with. And as you come into contact with that thing, you experience it and you identify its different features and you order it and comprehend it. And that comprehension makes the unconscious conscious. And when you've made the unconscious conscious, you no longer project it. And so you can see through illusion, and you reach something like a symbol of the self. And that symbol of the self in alchemy is the Philosopher's Stone.
Yes.
So what Victor is a Philosopher's Stone. He's a character that comes into contact with his whole unconscious symbolically. This is all symbolically. This is obviously not within the confines of like the plot.
Yeah.
He's coming into contact with the unknown. It transforms him and informs him into a kind of total person, a total personality. Jayce is placed in contrast with Victor throughout the whole series, where Jayce is the kind of preppy, idealistic, modernist inventor, starry-eyed. Victor is much more, he's from the underbelly, he has had a hard life. He's not naive like Jayce is. And so they have different reactions to chaos. Jayce goes from very, very high, so to speak, to very, very low. When he gets transported, they show us that he actually gets into this destroyed version of the world, which what could be, as opposed to what Heimerdinger and Echo see, which is what could have been.
Yeah.
And he immediately falls. Right, so
yeah, you see that too. He falls into that like pit after running away, like the marionettes.
Right, so he hits rock bottom.
Literally.
Okay? So he sees how bad things can be, and he's cast lower. Okay. It knocks him down. And so he's down there, and then he has to suffer a whole bunch and pull himself out of that hole. He's ascending throughout this process, and he climbs all the way up to the top to have a conversation with, who we find out later is Victor. And
yeah, that was so...
The way that they organize the whole episode, these episodes is so spectacular.
I had the thought that it could be Victor at some point. I don't remember when I had this thought. I'm not sure exactly what it was that told me that. And if you juxtapose someone like Heimerdinger and Echo versus Jayce, you basically have two sides of the same coin. All these characters are given what they need to experience to become more of themselves. Echo grew up in the Undercity with everything to shit. People fight over things. He sees crime constantly. Kind of the same thing, right? Like he's been nothing but disrespected from the world. Like he was once, this great respected scientist, but then the world's leaving him behind. and he also gets to pull away from his fame, right? Because he's been alive for so long, everyone respects him. But in that alternate reality, he's just a magician and he just has fun making music and giving people enjoyment.
He's also the representation of the past, right? He's ancient.
That's what it is.
He's the ancient past. And he dies, he disappears, giving himself up to the future.
Which is
right?
Echo.
The now inspired youth.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's always what he's done, because he did the same thing for Jayce in season 1.
Yeah. And then so they go together perfectly. Like
he's Merlin.
Really,
he's just
together, literally go together. They fit together.
Yeah.
And so they go, and you're right. You nailed it with that. This thing is always showing you what you need to see in order to develop. In that, what Echo gets is inspiration again, right? Because he's even talked, there's a monologue where he talks about how he gave up on what the Undercity could be. He was giving up on anything like that dream.
Right? All of it.
A young man in heart conditions, beat down to the point of no longer believing that things could be better. And what it shows him is could be, right? How things could have been, what's possible, right? And that's an inspiration for how he needs to develop and become really a hero because of how he behaves at the very end.
Yep.
He becomes a hero. And it's that developmental process, that inspiration, that leads him to that point. So he has to undergo this transformation. And he does that by seeing the good. So he's another person you could counterbalance Jayce with.
Right.
Right. So it's throughout the whole story, it's like Jayce and Victor, who are like two different avenues that are emerging out of modernism and the collapse of modernism. Is that this whole thing is a modernist myth.
Yeah.
All about progress and what does that mean? What are the consequences of progress and all this? It's all mythological. So it's not so on the nose, though sometimes it is. But throughout that story, it's Jayce and Victor. But then when they come into contact with the Arcane, you have Echo and Jayce. And Jayce is taken from very high to very low, and Echo is taken from very low to very high. They have to see these opposites in order to become whole person, right? You see, they have half story. What the alchemical process is doing is making you a whole person.
And it's also through the actions of the people, right? That, like, to balance everything, right? If Echo's not part of the story, then you get the future that is what Jayce saw, or vice versa. They play off of each other, and they need to be this cohesive thing to cancel themselves out, to become in balance again. Like, it's just tearing itself apart, I guess.
You're right to point that out too. It's not just that the characters need completeness or balance. It's that the world needs those characters to be balanced, so the world is balanced.
Yes.
And that it's their internal balance that allows them to become the kind of people that can recreate an equilibrium in their world.
And we'll get there. Is there anything to elaborate on the Echo's creation of, I'm sure we'll get there toward the end too more, but in his process of creating his hex core, because it's different than the original one, in this one they're kind of harnessing, like, going back in time, because Echo is seeing him being in that world is that he's now in this, he realizes that he's in a parallel future that's happening, like, it's the same time period, and he just needs to somehow get, like, back into his time. They do a really good job of showing the magic of it, because he's activating it over and over again, and they keep replaying the same sequence 1 second apart or 2 seconds apart, and then he's like, okay, what's the limit? And then he's like, 4 seconds. We don't, like, and you see
Heimerdinger card explodes.
And I'm like, damn, they do such a good job of, like, laying out the rules of the quote unquote magic, so that it doesn't feel like too goofy, because there's, like, a way that you could do this and it would just be like, oh my God, there's no stakes. It's just, kind of like how the Marvel movies get, where it doesn't matter, right? Like, They're going to find a way to overcome the problem because there's no limitations.
It's never Disney magic.
Facts,
It's
yes.
never a little stick with a little glowy star at the end and there's all these sparkle. It's you're fucking with something you don't understand. And that matters, right? And that gives everything gravity, right? To the decisions making. And the fact that he goes back like 2 seconds too far and then a head explodes is like, oh yeah, okay.
I think the best part too is that it's like, how do you know? And it's like, I just do. Like, take my word for it, please.
Like, I don't need to tell you.
Yeah, right. Sparing it. And I think less talented writers would feel like they would need to say something to the character instead of just letting the images or like the briefest of hints like hang there. And so that the audience can feel it and internalize it and be like in on it with Echo.
They know exactly how to show and not tell. They're very good at that. And part of that's because the medium, they have so much control over the imagery that they can show it in very creative and elaborate way and get a ton of information across a very short period.
Oh, 100%. I'm not sure if it was in this first episode with the Echo part of it, or was it in the next episode starting like in between the direct aftermath that they show Mel, because I think we should cover her thing too before we get too deep into the Victor Jayce part of this.
How about let's close the time loop stuff with them and then we'll move to Mel before going on Victor. How about that?
I like it.
So here's a note that I learned recently. You'll just appreciate this. The dancing scene between him and Powder, between Echo and Powder, where everything's slowed down. I think it's like 4 frames a second or something like that.
Interesting.
So they're matching the frame number to the number of seconds that he can go back in time. And so there's a deliberate move in the edit. That was clever.
That is so cool. What a good idea.
Yeah, and I bet they've got a billion different versions of that they can do in animation that we'll learn about as the fanatics of the show decompose every little element of it.
Yes, as people start deconstructing every little bit of the magic that is this show. Because what's cool about this, as a tangent that's like meta in the sense of like content creators being able to pick their own little niche of looking at a medium, whatever that is, film and TV show. Everyone kind of brings their own little spin and the things they notice. Like one of the things that I saw was that Isha, and these are people who work with either deaf or nonverbal kids, and they picked up on it, is that Isha is potentially deaf, not fully deaf, and mute. And like some of the things they picked up on is the way like sight lines. So in one of the sequences, there's a sequence where she's looking at Jinx's mouth, not her eyes. And you could see that in how they framed the character in scenes. And like the little nonverbal sound effects that sound really cute to audience members, but what actually that is it's another cue for deaf people because they don't even realize they're making those noises. Or like when she's walking into town with Warwick and Warwick jumps because of the metal quenching and she like immediately goes in a protective stance because she can't register those frequencies, but she still can recognize body language. Or the same thing when she gets defensive when Victor is reaching out to touch Vander for the first time, she gets defensive again because to Isha, people reaching out to you is a bad thing. Because when we first are introduced to her, people are like reaching out to grab her as she's running away in the Undercity. So it's like all these little subtle things where they really did the work to understand body language and then imprint that on the character.
See, you can't create a show this good if you don't care.
Yeah.
Like it's somebody cared enough to get that right. You know, to put in the effort to learn to, if this was the case, when the show is created out of love, it shows.
100%.
Really, sometimes you love something and you don't have any technical skills whatsoever. But if you already have all the technical skills and you love it, you can make something pretty remarkable.
Oh, yes.
And something like this. And then you can opposite and make that Lord of the Rings show or the Halo show that have been made by people who give a flying fuck about the sword.
Well, I think the difference of something like that is the reason I think Arcane is created as like this passion project is that it started within the studio that creates the very game, and it's within a very close partnership with the animation studio that do it together. if you took this and you say, okay, big name animation studio or whatever, we're going to sell you the rights to make this League of Legends show, you don't get Arcane. I think it needs to be with people who really, really give a shit about the source material. Otherwise, it doesn't happen. And it's not to say that it can't happen. Like Lord of the Rings happened because of Peter Jackson and the people he had around him.
The broader point being that the broader philosophical point being is that your aim determines the outcome.
Definitely.
Right. And that if you are acting out of love, then it changes the thing compared to acting out of money.
It feels like something that's like in service of, you know, the characters, of the fans, of the thing, right? Like if your aim is to create something that as many of your fans or you as someone who gives a shit about the things that you produce are putting as much of yourself into that thing to breathe, to animate it, which is ironic because it's animation.
Right.
And we talked about anima in the last episode. Like there's a reason there's so much richness in this, because when you are truly pushing something that speaks on so many different levels, it can't help but be expressed. And I think another part of that too is that if the people at the top who are generating the ideas feel that strongly about these things, I think that goes all the way down to the most junior level artists, and they feel even though they might not be as passionate about the core of it as much because they don't understand it, they have a tiny slice of it. I still think they can feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves, and having had worked on just a tiny slice of it is like, damn, that's fucking cool.
It's very cool.
So,
okay,
all that to being said,
all that being said, so cool facts about Echo.
Yes.
We'll leave it at Echo and Heimerdinger are a representation of what could be or what could have been. And so they see the positive having come from the negative. Jayce is coming from the positive and has to see the negative. And it makes both characters more complete and makes them actually heroic.
Yeah, the correct timeline.
And then where we rediscover Mel, who is now very interesting. Now she's great.
Yeah. All the conversation we've been having around just archetypal things, right? She's gold, right? She's got these like gold tattoos that go down her arms and down her fingers, and she's one of the few characters when they use magic, she's like light, effectively.
Right.
She's angelic, to maybe use a word. She might be one of the most positive, or because her magic isn't like, she's not aggressive in her magic either. And we'll get to the fight scene, which highlights that.
Her power is insight.
Mm-hmm.
Right. She too has, after having come into contact with the arcane, gains vision. She, how would you say? She cuts through illusion. Right. This is a staple in the psychological discussions of wisdom, by the way. That when people talk about wisdoms, one of the main things that they endorse is something like ability to see through the bullshit, ability to cut through all the illusions. Right. So she's gained that in contact with the arcane. Right now. So in the one character whose name I don't think we hear, like
the shadowy figure.
Yeah. She even says like that your whole deal is that you can see the truth. And the girl who sees the truth, Mel, even calls that woman a deceiver. Right. So they're now, those two are now juxtaposed to each other. Right now they're counterbalancing each other. One is dark and occluded, hides intentions, is a deceiver. And the other one is light. And so light, shine a light on something. It reveals. She sees through things, right? It's all about vision, enlightenment, right? So she has that as her capacity. And it's like, there's a manifestation of like the magic is always a kind of, besides cool visuals, symbolically, how is it that insight or vision magically alters the world.
Yes.
And that if they've got it right, or if they're picking up on that thread, or they're following that intuition, the writers, then you'll see interesting commentary on what it is, what kind of powers insight would give you. And one of the things that you see is that she's able to basically predict her mother's behavior, what they're going to create a plan, and then see how to deal with their mom. But she's also sympathetic, even at the end.
Yeah,
for her
she
enemy.
totally is.
It sees.
Mel is one of the most, she has restraint at the very least, and she's not one to use excessive force, even if she's justified in using excessive force, right? Because it's very clear that when Mel comes back, Jayce is back, Caitlyn and Vi, like, they all kind of realize the stakes, but at the same time, they're not willing to go to the same lengths as Mbessa is in general. And I'm trying to think of how we see that play out. And I think part of that too is because they finally ask help of the Undercity, right? And at first it looks like the Undercity is going to be like, nope, don't want to, you guys have persecuted us this whole time. Like, and then they show up, right? And then you have it's almost like, it felt almost Lord of the Rings like, where after the battle takes place and they're slowly being, defenses are pushed back, and it like, everything looks like it's lost, right?
That battle sequence was awesome. They've done such a good job of making me think we're going in one direction and then changing it, but not changing it in the cheap George R.R. Martin kind of, where at a certain
we just
point
kill a character.
Right. It's like, we're just going to subvert expectations for the sake of subverting expectations and pretend like that's good writing. Like, no, this is just editing. This is just taking one box and breaking it and doing, like, this is where the story wants us to go, and I'm just going to not do that. It's like, okay, it doesn't make it good. All right. So they do a very good way of kind of, it's not exactly subverting expectations. It's more like they're playing with the sequencing. They're playing with where there is an anticipation of where things are about to move, but it's not just pure cynical postmodern nonsense. There's something else going on there that I can't quite put my finger on, but they do a very good job of keeping you on your toes. And so, like, I expected episode 7 to not be chill. And it was chill. Like, at least half of it was.
I mean, it was very much a setup episode, but at the same time, it felt like the entire step of the way, the stakes of the situation were building. And what it really felt like to me was the rearranging of all the pieces on the chessboard, right? Because you have Victor kind of finally seeing his old mentor's way of like, evolution is the only way we get through this. Where he's like, oh, wait, if you want to see evolution, I can give you that, right? Because all those people that were once followers of Victor are still, their bodies are still there, and he can speak through them. Like the fingerprints are like pulsing as he speaks. It's kind of unsettling. And then you have I think it's close to the end of that episode, he's like, I'll show you. And then he, like, one of those people lifts up off the ground and they get like turned into the marionettes that we saw in Jayce's experience. And it's like, oh, there it is. And then they show up. Finally, you see Victor's emissary shows up in the council room right as Jayce and Mel are finally reunited. And it looks like Jayce is going to be angry at Mel for whatever reason, or because he feels like he's been betrayed by her, because he thinks, hey, you were just pushing young, naive inventors to create weapons for you. And I think he's partly justified in feeling that way.
Yeah.
But then
I liked that they had that part in there, because it was justified. It was like, you took 2 naive people and you manipulated us. And he was right to be angry now that he's seen through her bullshit. Thank you for doing that.
And they did it smartly in the sense that because they did tension, right? Again, tension release. They have her, Jayce and Mel, tension. And as soon as you think it's going to go one way, then Victor's automaton shows up. And then now all of a sudden it's like, new problem, more important to deal with than what our interpersonal squabble is about past decisions. Let's solve this first. And then in that moment, what it unfolds is that regardless of the issues, that Jayce still wants to protect people that he cares about because he puts himself in danger to protect her because he doesn't want to see her get hurt. I think they do a really good job of putting people's, they might have disagreements, but they elevate the higher order things and with action, not with words.
And they do they give you, it's totally believable because it's not just like, oh, all's forgiven. It's believable because of the experience that Jayce had, where Jayce is like horrified and he's very driven. They do a very good job with the symbolism and the imagery in the previous 2 episodes. They threw me off the scent because I thought that what Jayce was just his mind broken. He's gone insane, and that his experience with the unconscious has destroyed him. And in some sense, he's clearly disoriented. They do that in the imagery by literally showing at points like his head splitting, or
it's like separating.
Right. So he's many minds, right? He has many identities. He's fractured, right? So that's that symbolism. But at the end of his experience there, when he takes the hammer again, he's not actually many minds. He's of one mind, one purpose. Don't let this happen. Yes. Right. I've seen what is coming. We understand too. This is what's so great about that battle sequence, is that now that we've seen where this can go, how bad it can go, we now watch the battle sequence play out and we're like, oh, it's happening. Like, this is how that happens. This is going to be bad. The whole time. Like, oh shit. This is not going well. They're fucked. The writing, the imagery, all of it's so good.
Yeah. It's all firing on all cylinders, basically. And I think, too,
what $250 million gets you.
Yeah. And I think, like, leading up to this battle sequence, too, is they showed where, after the evolutionary thing takes place with the marionette, they beat it barely. And it kind of elevates the stakes even more. Like, Jesus Christ, if this is one thing that Victor can do now, like, what's a whole army of these things look like? And not to mention just the Noxan army, which is supposedly one of the best armies in the world, led by one of the best warlords in the world, is going to come barreling down on this city. Like, Jesus, like, talk about insurmountable force. And I think we need to take the second and say, you called it forever ago. In Act 1, you said, if we lose Victor's face, we lose him. And that's exactly what happened inside the chrysalis when they pump in the blood of Vander and you see his face. It's not as simple as just like you lose his face, but it's like his face splits down the middle and then it creates this like face mask out of his face.
Okay, so now I want to talk. Now we can talk. I had to think about this one for a bit because he was on the right path right up until a bunch of people die and he dies again. And that.
Yes.
So he's unwilling to sacrifice individuals for the sake of some ridiculous cause, right? That he values the individual in a very deep way before that second death. And then that thing makes him cynical and he buys into the doctor's ideas. And what he does is, I was trying to think of what's the shift, right? Because he had something right. What is this new belief system that he's holding? What does he become? And he becomes, there's a few different ways you can see it. He becomes all mind, no matter. He becomes all spirit, no earth would be another way of putting that. He becomes about form, right? It's a platonic form is what he becomes. It's something outside of concrete reality. He's like 4, not 4 instances of this pen that's concrete in reality. He's the number 4 in idea and abstraction, right? So he stands above everything else. He's not limited by the vicissitudes of nature. A person is born with a bum leg, for example, and a disease, and that these constraints are imperfections. You can have perfection, but only in form, not in reality. It's always an idea. It's always something that's outside of nature. And this is this thing that he's aspiring to. It's perfection now that he shifts to. And so his acolytes become white and gold. There's no darkness anymore. So there's no shadow to them. There's no depth. It's all covered. It's all bright. It's total, right? If you shine a light on everything, you see everything, total knowledge, right? he becomes something like a representation of a transhumanist deity, that the purpose of technology is to force perfection on a flawed human nature. And that he decides at some point that the problem is actually human nature itself, and that must be done away with.
Yeah.
That's what makes him the villain.
He wanted to limit choice because he saw it as that when people had a choice, that's when things go wrong.
Choice has to be eliminated because choice is a variation from a norm. And if that norm is perfect, then you have to cull all other options besides the perfection. And so all of his acolytes become not individuals, but they're ideologues. They're ideologues. Yes. They speak in the words of another person, right? A real Marxist doesn't speak their own words. Marx speaks through them. That's what's happening. You see, he's a transhumanist deity using technology to perfect humans, freeing them of their nature. And he has acolytes that are representations of him in some sense in the world, right? They're organized underneath his identity.
Yeah. And we'll see that as we get to the actual climax of the series and what that represents, because I think they nail it really well. It's almost like a Darth Vader thing, but we'll get there.
But you see what I'm saying, right? He's the organizing principle for all of the other people beneath him, and they become one total thing.
It's one so identity. Good.
You get what an old school Greek deity is, by the way. He's an extreme version of this perfection that they don't have that kind of perfection. They have character and ambiguity, but the same thing remains, an identity that's floating above a bunch of other people that they participate in. And you're a philosopher insofar as you worship Sophia. You try to align your behavior underneath that ideal, right? And it's humanized, it's personified, makes it a character. And then you imitate the character as it's an ideal. And then you are a worshiper of that thing, right? And it changes your mind. This ideal, as you approach it, as you understand it better, as you become more like it, you become more like the thing, right? You embody it. You incarnate it. Right? Christ is an incarnation of God, right? Man becomes God, right? He imitates God as an ideal to such a degree that God becomes flesh, so to speak, which is to say that he is a perfect imitation of that thing. It embodies it.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's why
similar.
Like right before the very end, when you see every time one of the automatons touch people, you see those threads come down, or even before that, when they touch their faces, you see they start to become metallic and the color leaves their eyes as part of that transformation.
They go blind like an ideologue is blind.
Right. It's such a good way to represent it.
Right. And it's not like the guys that are doing this, I'd be shocked. Maybe they do. But it's not like they know this consciously. Maybe in the course of creating the show, they're starting to understand this, but it's like, it's what feels right. You already know it, right? The symbols are built as part of our cognitive structure that have to find a form of expression. And this is, when it feels right, you're properly expressing the idea. Do they know it? So good.
There might be someone who understands it.
The question is actually, do they consciously know it?
Yeah, right. Do we want to elaborate on the magic of Mel a little bit further before we get to the climax between Echo, Jayce, and Victor?
Does anything stand out for you about her magic besides what we already had?
It's more of this that she uses it in a sense to protect others rather than be offensive. Because it's like right in that moment where we think Caitlyn's about to get executed.
She's definitely looking for the good. And she still has hope that you can arrive at that through negotiation without this combat. She sees through her mom's shit to the point where even her mom calls her a wolf, right? So she's after exhausting all of her options, she finally is willing to be offensive. So she's a character of light. She's sort of angelic, right? So she's white and gold.
Maybe a white color.
The gold is value.
Okay. White and gold. She's like the white mage. She almost reminds you of like Gandalf in some sense when she finally gets her powers because she wears the white robe. Then she like
it'd be
casts it
similar
aside.
because Gandalf has been enlightened, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah, it's a similar thing going on there. Gold is associated with the sun because of
Sun,
light, but also
yeah,
because it's golden sun, and gold is a high value metal,
yeah.
right? It's all the same idea.
Okay,
So she's the valuable, whatever she is, she's enlightening, and that's a very valuable thing.
hmm
And her eyes are gold, so her
right.
vision
That's
is
when she
valuable.
activates her power, and then I guess from there we kind of have to tangent a little bit further because part of the monkey wrench that happens in the big fight is that Powder is gone. She's like, I'm out of this because she tricks Vi into being locked in the cell. When Vi's like, I'm not going to give up on you. Like we're sisters, no matter what. And Powder or Jinx kind of gets it. Like at that moment, she's like, you're never going to give up on me, no matter how bad I am or how many times I make a mistake. You're always going to try to like save me either from myself or to be. You see me as better than I actually am. The first thing that Echo does when he comes back is he finds Jinx. And I think part of that is that because of his experiences in the other timeline, he kind of sees what could be, right? He sees again, everyone gets to see what is good or bad about the other. And I think for Echo, because he was mad at Jinx from season 1, so he kind of had a chip on his shoulder about her actions. Um, and so he was basically kind of thrown off, like maybe they're in a different timeline. There could have been something different between us, and she's a genius to some degree, right? She's still good at technology. And so he kind of talks her off from basically committing suicide or ending it as we know it. And so it kind of hard cuts and we don't know what happened. But like right when everything looks like it's going to shit, she shows up with Echo. And I think it's almost kind of like the Han Solo Millennium Falcon type sequence to some degree, showing up at the last minute. And I think this is where final couple minutes of the show is really taking place. Because at this point, the fight between Ambessa and her forces are kind of taking over, and Jayce is kind of in a stranglehold with Victor and is slowly being, I guess, losing his soul. Is that probably the best way to put it? When Victor is asserting his influence over everybody.
That would be a good way to put it. Like you could imagine that what your soul is something like those subtle under the surface nuances
Mm-hmm.
about yourself, right? The parts of you that you don't quite want to say out loud, maybe even your objections to an ideology,
Yeah.
right? But subordinate yourself to something like an ideology, you lose your objections to it, right? That you do sacrifice, you're nothing but a zealot,
Right.
right? And so,
Subservient to a thing, right? Like an idea or like you say, this god like figure, where
yeah,
you're not even in control of your own actions anymore. Well, could be literally and figuratively. And I think
no,
what makes this sequence interesting is that because of Echo's ability to use technology, right? He's got that hoverboard that nobody else really uses. A few other of the people, but he's the only one that we really know is a master at it. And now he's got this new tool. And every time he's almost there, he gets knocked off the board. So he restarts and gets a little bit further and restarts and gets a little bit further. And then finally, when he gets right there, and throughout this, that Jayce and Victor are having this conversation in the celestial world. Finally, everything is stripped away. But in that celestial world, Victor still has his mask on. And then finally, Echo gets there with his rewind. I don't even know what you call it, like rewinding tool, and use it to well beyond the 4-second limit. And you see it goes off, and Victor realizes it in real. He's like, this thing should not be, is what he says, or something along those lines, which is so
okay.
cool.
So if he's a being pure light and everything there is no ambiguity anymore. There's
Mhm.
nothing that you don't see, right? So there's nothing you don't know. That's the symbolism. That the
Mhm.
darkness is the unknown, right? So it's neither good nor bad. Actually, There's a lot of good, as we see throughout the story, that comes out of going into the darkness and discovering it. The thing that undermines the total being is the thing that in his framework shouldn't exist.
Yes.
And that's exactly right. That's how that happens, is that if you have a unmoving, rigid, ideological mindset, you will discount all the things that don't fit into it as they just shouldn't exist. This is like Chernobyl. If you ever watched Chernobyl, it's brilliant.
Love that show.
All throughout Chernobyl, they're like, well, how could this, reading occur? And they're like, well, it couldn't occur. How could this explosion happen? Well, it couldn't happen. So it didn't. The whole fucking plant just blew up. There's the reading. It says right there that that's the case. These things happen. How is it that there's this kind of graphite or whatever on the ground? Well, it can't be on the ground because it's impossible that the thing exploded. None of our theories support that. So it just didn't happen. But the evidence is they won't trust their eyes. That's the same problem with them losing their vision when they get subordinated to Victor, right? They lose their vision. They won't trust their eyes anymore. They won't, what's right in front of their face, reality itself, consciousness, they no longer trust. They only trust their rigid ideological belief system, and everything outside of that doesn't exist. And Victor is undermined by that fact.
Mm-hmm.
That is exactly what happens in real life.
Yep. And so symbolically, what happens is when the explosion occurs, it breaks off part of his new face, his mask. And you finally see Victor in his human form finally reappears. And in that moment, his humanity reemerges. And he's able to kind of stop himself and be like, wait, what am I doing? And he kind of almost comes to his senses. And instead of Jayce fighting back and being like, look at what you're doing, like fighting fire with fire, he tries to reconnect with Victor as a friend, as someone who his partner. This all started with people with aligned ideas or aligned visions of what a good world could be. And it kind of recalibrates itself around that idea. And what's really interesting is that all of this happens not in the physical world, but in this weird other plane. So like probably in the real world, this is all going on in seconds. But for us, the viewer, we're seeing this over minutes. And
Right.
It makes it that much more interesting as to the gravity of the situation symbolically. And to finally have Jayce, instead of being emotional and being like, oh no, we're just not on the same page anymore, see you later, peace out, right? They finally are able to get on the same page again. And you see how that realignment saves the world.
Right. And notice that the contact with the unknown humbles is another way of thinking about it. Humbles Victor.
Mm-hmm.
So now he's no longer all spirit, all mind, all ideology. He's brought down to earth, right? So not deity up above us, lower, brought down to his humanity. So he's humbled. And in his humility, Jayce has the opportunity to connect with him.
Yep.
And he could make any number of wrong decisions that would create a defensive reaction, but he doesn't. It's love that allows him to reconnect, right? In a kind of forgiveness, that understanding, like, I know what you were trying to do. I see you for who you are. I know you.
Yeah.
I love you. I care about you. Let me speak to you through that mode, right?
Yeah.
You would even be justified chewing him out, right? But that wouldn't accomplish what you would want. And it's not even instrumental, right? Love isn't instrumental. It lives in and of itself. And so he acts in love towards Victor when Victor has been humbled enough to hear it. And that's what saves us. Right?
And what's even cooler, I think, about that too, is like they finally show who the hooded figure was, right?
Which he's like, I guess I watched it.
I know. Because it's like for this whole time, Jayce has had the rune crystal on his wrist in like a little strap. And then after being inside of the alternate reality, it like grafts into his arm. And at whatever point he goes, how did you know? And then Victor remembers what happened. He's like, oh, I realized that it always had to be you. If I ran, all the possibilities of this world is that I realized that it was always you who could be the one to break me out of this. And then they show that figure that was standing there when he got the corrupted hammer mace thing. And they finally show, and it's an old Victor, and he's the only one alive. There's no one else. It's like, would you want to be a ruler of an empty world? Like, what? Like, if you removed all choice from the world.
Of course, what the symbolism really suggests is that Victor's dead. There's not actually anyone alive there. That what Victor is nothing but an idea, and one that holds the idea. In the world itself, good. All that's left is the idea, but reality itself has been turned out.
That's interesting. You need people to hold.
Where is ideas the idea?
Ideas are in people.
But ideas are distributed across an array of persons. That's the mimetic world. That's heaven, by the way.
That's
what heaven.
Cool.
When you die and you go to heaven, it's because your pattern of being has been adopted by enough people that pattern of being is acted out even after your death. And so you still live, but you live distributed across an array of persons. That's what heaven is.
That's so goddamn cool.
It's not a place where your consciousness goes after your body decomposes. It's where your spirit or your pattern of being ascends to and is adopted by us mere earthlings that are still living.
Yeah. Damn.
So there are people alive today that are already in heaven.
Right.
Insofar as you act out there. So like Marx is in heaven, he'd be a fallen angel. Because if what you do is pursue the Marxist way of being in the world, it undermines life. Yeah. Right? So it's in heaven, so to speak. He's still there. He's still spirit in heaven. But it's one that if you fall, it will take you to hell. Right. So that's why Lucifer is a fallen angel. It's a pattern of being that is still distributed across many people, but it decomposes them prematurely. It disintegrates their psychology.
Disintegrates them.
Yeah. And destroys the world.
That is so good.
That's hell. Good. But hell is the disintegrated psyche.
Right.
Right. So that you're no longer an ego under which all these different parts of yourself are aligned, right? And so that they're under your unity, so to speak. Right? That you unify these different pieces, but the whole hierarchy collapses down. You fall into an equivalence or beneath all these other impulses that you have. And now they reign over the human body at different periods of time. And you're just one character in this underworldly way of being.
And do you think we were thrown off by Jayce's actions in the last act? Like, we thought he could have been like a fallen angel, right? Because of his like single-minded determinism. And we thought was egoic.
I thought that when he came out the Arcane thing, and that the symbolism of his split minds, I thought that was a symbolism of a fractured psyche and that he was in hell. And that it was the competing series of psychological forces that are vying for supremacy over like the human body, the system, to who operates the system. Does your anger operate the system? Does your hunger operate the system? Or do you operate the system? Who's in control of you? If you're just one character that can be in control at particular times, but other of these characters are equally as likely to take control of the system, that's hell. That's what hell is. And you can go deeper and deeper and deeper, and you can have less and less control over yourself. Yeah. But I thought that Jayce was of many minds, and that's what that symbolism suggested. And I think that they might have done that intentionally because they're trying to throw you off the trail. Right? The fuck are you doing, Jayce? Like, oh, dude, Victor, like this heavenly figure, like he's the underworld's Jesus, and you just killed Jesus. What the hell are you doing?
The dichotomy.
And it's another good example of how they're very good at playing with your expectation. They fucking got my ass.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Is like, as you're like playing it out, I'm like, oh, okay, I can see where these different pieces are like interweaving, where it looks like it could be going in one direction or the other. And then I think too, what we realize too is that even though Jayce has a certain level of conviction to him, it's that when he's finally in that last confrontation with Victor and he's finally hearing his words again and getting the meaning of it, is that he's like, Victor, I saw that you needed to remove imperfections from the world, right? Because Victor saw himself as an imperfection, right? He was born with that gimp leg and things like that, and born in the Undercity. And he's like, those things didn't matter. He's like, what I saw was a brilliant scientist that could help people in spite of the things that were wrong with you in physical form, right? And it's like he finally is able to realize that being perfect physically does not mean that you don't provide value to the world.
The essence of the quote is that freezing things, this perfection, is not, it's not even realistic.
Right.
That it's missing the point that reality is always in flux. That change and that dynamism is a necessary part of the good. And that the attempts to perfect it are actually a mistake. It's a misleading value, right? That if you pursue that objective, if you act like the world needs to be perfected, then you actually undermine the world. Even if you think you're trying to perfect it for good, that what
Right.
the good requires is actually a movement, a process, and the adaptation, a constant flux.
Well, I feel like we've talked about this before in different contexts, but it's like when you calcify something, right? Like you try to make something so rigid that like you think right now this solution is the best solution for all time. That all that does is make the entire foundation like fundamentally brittle, because there will always become a point where that solution no longer is valid. And if you close yourself off to that degree where you can't, to kind of going back to the echo thing, right? This thing should not be, that moment will always
Yeah.
happen. It might not happen at that grandiose scale, but that's like everybody's life will have that thing, or that they'll come into contact with something that's so far out of their worldview that it just shatters you into 1,000 pieces. And
Yeah, always.
and
And in fact, the more rigid you become, the more likely it's going to be. And there's technical reasons for this, because reality itself is changing, always changing.
yeah,
So, okay, so here's that. Take that as an axiom. Change is the only constant. Okay? There's something peculiar about our psychology. So Ian McGilchrist, in his book, The Master and His Emissary, talks about the differences in the hemispheres of the brain. And the right hemisphere is made to pay attention to reality as it is, as it's changing, the subtleties of everything, to see things as they are. The left, and part of that is to pay attention to the world, to see what's coming at you and to protect you against predators. The left hemisphere of the brain is about objectives. It's a predator part of the brain. It tracks an object and then pursues that object until it grasps it. Out of that architecture, out of that scaffolding, that perfection emerges, the idea of perfection. Perfection is an objective. It's something to be grasped, something that can be achieved, that it's a frozen thing. And then when it's done, it's done. It's complete. You get the objective and it's been completed. That's part of it, that you reach a final evolution, the final objective, the end all be all, the done. But if you could reach that perfection, even for a moment, make things exactly as like their purpose, you will have achieved that objective and it will be frozen and over with. It's complete. While you're in that, while you have your frozen, it's all good, we're done here moment, the underground, the reality is now no longer what it was. And so the thing you thought was perfect no longer fits the environment. And so if you pursue perfection, even if you could achieve it, it would still fail. Perfectionism is death. Perfection is stagnation. Stagnation is death. Do you understand?
Yeah.
And so that's part of what he's coming to a conclusion, is a recognition of the fact that perfection is a terribly bad idea. And that's I love that this whole thing is a modernist myth. That is the realization. That's the realization that is the conclusion of transhumanism, if it will think. That you can't change out our nature and believe that this machine we'll replace ourselves with will be better off.
Right.
For a split second, and then it's fucked because it can't adapt like we can.
Right. That's what I was thinking. Is like maybe the superpower of humanity, the machines and the systems that we create. What actually is the superpower is adaptability.
Our higher cognition is just a rapid form of adaptation. Because
Right.
the body adapts over incredibly long spans of time. It takes a very, very long time for us to adapt. It takes a lot of people to die and to get out of the gene pool for that change to happen. But what you can do, if you can change your mind quickly,
Yes.
then you can keep up with the rate of change in the environment.
Could you say that something about like our cognitive ability is supercharged evolution, right? Because we can quote unquote run simulations with ideas, right? And ways of being, to use the archetypal and psychological stuff of this, to run that experiment. And like you were saying, is like the good ideas go to heaven, and that gives you a blueprint in which to behave to be the most adaptive possible. And it's through thousands and thousands and thousands of iterations that we've come to understand. And some of these people, even if they're not real, we know them as names. Right? Things to emulate, right? Like Jesus and the Buddha and Martin Luther King or whoever, right? You have these different archetypes that we can point to and say, okay, they were going in the right direction at the very least.
Yep. You've got it exactly right. We come up with ideas. Jordan Peterson knows this, right? This is part of where I'm being born from, but it's that. And I think he quotes this from Whitehead, who said something like, our ideas die so we don't have to.
Yes.
So your brain is running a bunch of possible futures and then choosing the one that gets you closer to the ideal outcome. That's what Echo's doing. And then he's doing it until he chooses the one that allows for him to get closer to survival.
Yes.
So that same game is being played within our heads all the time. We're coming up with 15 different possible options for what could go right or wrong. And then we emulate the idea that is most likely to produce our survival and flourishing. We imitate ourselves in a sense. It's a feedback loop where we come up with an avatar ourselves in our mind. And if it survives, then we imitate that avatar.
I think that's why people somewhat resonate to video games, right? Because we like the idea of being able to give challenges. And then if you fail one time, then you could try again and try a different strategy or slightly, right? Like you learn. It's basically Echo in a microcosm. Right? Whenever you play a video game that has a challenging thing that you have to overcome, every time you do it, you get a little bit further, or you learn a little bit more about the pattern, or learn a little bit more about where not to be, right? And I think that's life. And it's showing you in like a gamified way, because obviously you can't redo life, but there are things that you learn from every experience you encounter. And I think that might be one of the core themes of this entire show, is just showing how people gain and accumulate experience, is that some of these characters view themselves as broken, or that no matter what they do, they fail, or no matter what they do, they can't save the people they care about or can't protect the people they care about. And it's because at some point it's not about that, right? Like, I think to kind of start wrapping up this whole thing at the very end, right, where you finally have Jinx and Vi, and then Vander's arguably soulless body, is the ultimate, almost, I guess it's poetic that it's all three of them together for one last time. If it was up to Vi, she would never have let go, because at the very end there, she's holding on to Jinx, and Vander is trying to crawl up Powder. And in that moment, Jinx grabs the little hex core marble that's powering the gauntlet so that the gauntlet loses power and it falls. And she sacrifices herself to save Vi. And we don't know what happens.
He's dead.
Here's the rule in storytelling: is if you don't see a dead body, they're not dead. So, like, you can say Ambessa's dead because you see her dead body and they have a last conversation.
Yeah, good. But okay, so you're great. Like, absolutely. I love what they did with Jinx at the end, where she sacrifices herself. She was in this.
Maybe she learned from Isha for real because she finally is able to sacrifice herself to save someone she
Well,
loves.
I'm afraid it's more depressing than that. I think that she got the suicide that she wanted, but now it's for good. She was already going to let go. She already had let go. And the
Yeah,
one
you're
person
right.
that wouldn't let go, that couldn't learn the fucking lesson, was Vi. And Jinx is like, I'm going to do this for us. I've already done it.
Like, because didn't she say too, like, you deserve her or something like that? Like, you deserve to be happy. I think talking about like being with Caitlyn. I think it was kind of like saying it's like, it's okay. Like, you can live your life instead of being torn between like being my protector and having a future.
Yeah.
Because
In
she was
some
always
sense,
going to
Vi
be.
throughout the whole series is destroying herself for her corrupted sister's sake. And it's like you're trying to get back something that's long gone. But yeah,
with the very thing that made Jinx what she was. And if the show were allowed to keep going, I think eventually what happens is that Vi is totally broken and twisted in a worse shape than Jinx ever was. Right? If you run this experiment all the way out to its extreme.
I know. I mean, this is a tragedy, right? Their story
Yes.
is tragic.
It's
right?
very Shakespearean, I would say. Like that part of
In
the
a way,
story,
yeah.
you lose dad again for real, and you lose your sister, which you thought was going to happen anyways, but it's in that context, it makes it that much more painful because you wish it wasn't like the price you had to pay to get to that outcome is like reopening old wounds at the same time as creating new ones.
Right. And they definitely lose Vander. He's gone.
For real.
And I mean, he's gonna come back and like
I think it
yeah,
would just cheapen the whole climax if he did come
so
back
I
in any
hope
way.
they did bring him back. But
I think it's fine the
yeah,
way they ended it.
and I'm very, very satisfied with the way that this whole show ended. I think
Honestly,
that all the threats, I think all the characters got their due.
And I don't think they left it so ambiguously. Only one is ambiguous is Jinx for real, but like Jayce and Victor are in the celestial world doing their whatever their thing is, arguably dud because they just cancel each other out. And then one of the last scenes you see, instead of that hammer being upside down and like stuck like it was in the alternate reality, it crumbles to dust. So like it's kind of, to me, what that signified was that the future that could have been was canceled out. Like it didn't happen. So that weapon that came from that world could no longer exist.
Right. Yeah, I think that you're right. I think that it's showing us that it's over.
It's over. And now the people of Piltover can move on, whatever that means. And I think what's even more poetic is you don't have the people that instigated this around to try and shape that future. The only one that's around is Mel, but she didn't understand the arcane, and she's got her own magical things that she has, and she's the Noxan leader now, so she's going to go back home, arguably, to go after these shadowy people.
Which might be where the next series goes. It might follow Mel back home.
And because we see that like 3-eyed or 6-eyed crow thing show up, and it's like picking out the corpse of where Victor was, arguably probably, or potentially picking up a leftover hex core thing inside the corpse of Victor to, the whole reason this show started is with that marble or a marble. We didn't actually say that though, but when Echo leaves, you see Powder with a drawer with the memorial to Vi, and she had saved the pieces of the arcane of the little hex cores. So it also leaves open-ended there, right? Because now you can kind of, I hate to say it, but you have a multiversal option.
I pray they don't.
I think we're all tired of it, but it leaves it open to interpretation. This is not the only variant of their story, right? Whatever. It's not the only time in which the arcane emerges, and you could play with these characters in different ways to create the emergence of the arcane. That's the way I'm interpreting it.
And we can shed a tear for the powder that never was. I applaud the studio. I applaud the show makers, the creators.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
they did great.
They can take my criticisms in our first episode of this on the chin, and then
honestly, I don't have much criticism. Yeah, right.
Talk my shit.
Right, like outside of what we talked about from the first act, I can't even think about any core criticisms overall.
And frankly, even the criticisms that I have get dwarfed over the course of this series, and especially the ending.
Honestly, the fact that I think it should not go understated, the ability to stick the landing for a show as interweaving as this was. They had a pretty big cast of characters. They could have left some of them open. I honestly thought they were going to leave Mel's story totally open and not really give a conclusion on it. Even Echo, I thought potentially they were just going to leave it open and just let it be hanging out there and be like, maybe in the next one, and just leave it at that.
And they had an ensemble cast with no one was the protagonist. There were many protagonists, and they were able to tie all these pieces together in a really remarkable way. It was spectacular. He was very thought out from a mythological standpoint. That I agree with the conclusions. Right? I see how that follows. Like I get that. I like how do you say prescient it is, right? That we are in that period culturally, that this is
100%.
Death of modernism and our progress for progress's sake, and we're disillusioned with that fact, and there's nihilism, and there's a question of where's the meaning and what do we do next, and do we fall under perfectionist ideologies, or do we come back to the importance of human action and love?
It's like we have a choice. It's like, do you chase some ideal that can't work, and potentially by chasing that goal, you get used by warmongers, using the things you try to create for war and bloodshed? Or can we take a step back and reconnect with those around us to some degree, right? And try to realize, like, what are we doing this for? Because it's almost like, at the very least, it's people who lost their way. Like with Victor and Jayce, they were both doing it for the right reasons, and then all of a sudden, because of circumstances outside of their own control, they get shoved, to the
They're common current.
Yeah,
they're representations of what happens to every person. Right? We're historical creatures. We're in a time in history, and there's cultural currents that are moving, many of which we're totally unconscious, and you'll be acting out the consequences of decisions that people made a century ago or more. It's our responsibility to, I think, really make the unconscious conscious, to see what kind of character you are, right?
Yeah.
What part are you playing in this moment in history? And that the more conscious you can become, the more you can see not only a way out of the circumstances that we are, but you get to be your full self.
Yeah. And I think too, like, it's kind of like what you were saying along that line. Is like Victor, like, forgot what the arcane as prescient and able to see outside of himself when he was in his full metamorphosis in the very last chapter, was that he'd forgot what the very hex core was, which is chaos, right? Like, if this whole thing was started by chaos, and he comes to the conclusion that trying to remove change or choice is the answer, he's missing the whole point. Like, this all started because of contact with chaos, which is changed, ratcheted up to this insane degree that you can't even predict it. Like unpredictable runes. Like,
he becomes kind of a reactionary against the chaos, and that he sees even the inherent chaotic nature of human beings and tries to counterbalance that with perfection, misunderstanding that actually that dynamism in people is what allows us to achieve the good.
Yeah.
It's just the good isn't a perfect thing. It's a living, breathing.
It's like its own organism.
Yeah,
like a super organism.
Yeah.
Throughout.
It's something you encounter in life, that you breathe, that you
interact
embody.
With. Yeah.
Right?
Embodying, it's channeled through your actions every day.
If everything froze, besides the fact that we just die. There's no living.
Well, it's because living is a verb.
Yeah, this is the tyranny of this idealism, right? In a technical sense, like it's ideas that we're imposing on reality, when reality needs to be the foundation, and the ideas are just to help us organize things in a particular way.
And maybe that's why the Dr. Singed feels wrong, because he's keeping his daughter in stasis. He's not allowing her to die, and he's chasing a goal, which is never having her die, or defeating death, at the very least, whatever that means. It's noble in one sense, because any parent doesn't want to see their child die. But at the same time, it's wrong because everyone will die.
He commits all manner of atrocities.
Right.
So he
in
misses
service of it.
the good that is to pursue some good that could never be in the first place.
Right.
Right. He's going to sacrifice the whole world to achieve nothing.
Yeah.
So it's like, no, he's the lowest of the low.
So good. I wish I could say there'll be more, but there is no more.
He announced that they've been working on a next series.
They said there's a couple of major projects, at least another series. I think there's a movie in the works, but it's all like early, like super early development. So nothing like actually full shape for production yet. But I think honestly at this point, Fortiche, the studio that has done all the animation, has basically put itself on the map as one of the best animation studios in the world.
They're the only studio I've seen that really knows how to strike the balance between 3D and 2D. Right, that they can blend those things and it's not jarring or stupid.
And Riot Games or Riot Studios, they've, I think, put themselves on the map strongly as a contender for being able to translate their ideas beyond a video game, especially a video game that doesn't have really a narrative or a story behind it. Like, they had characters, but creating a compelling narrative around characters that are mostly blank slates is no easy task. And I hope that this is not the first nor the last, because it's nice. It's nice when we have good stories to talk about. Take notes, please.
It makes me happy to see the good stuff popping up again.
This is probably one of the best shows of the year. If you've made it this far in a podcast, you probably watched it, but definitely up there. Well, everyone, to be continued with whatever next thing that will be about archetypes and story. Don't know what that'll be yet, but if you got any comments or things we should check out, throw them in the comment sections wherever you're listening to this, and we'll be back very soon.
Bye.